So, this is like a genuine emergency session because we are absolutely cooked. Man, I woke up early this morning, looked straight at the newest economic data releases, hitting the wire, and realized that the entire global financial matrix is actively beginning to fracture right before our very eyes. So, I am going to show you two deeply disturbing clips today, and then you and I are going to have a highly serious, raw philosophical discussion about skyrocketing interest rates, the brand new leadership inside the Federal Reserve, and what I think is really actually going on behind closed doors with the United States economy. Because let us be completely honest here from the very jump, the mainstream corporate media is completely lying to your face about the structural integrity of your money. Okay, we have a brand new Fed chair stepping into power. At least we will have as soon as he is officially sworn into office. Kevin Warsh now officially possesses 51 votes for confirmation on the Senate floor. The voting window is technically still open right now. The tally is sitting exactly at 51 to 40. So, there are still some stray Democrats and some moderate Republicans who haven't cast their final physical votes yet. But we already know for an absolute fact that John Fetterman, the high-profile Democrat from Pennsylvania, did vote completely in favor of Kevin Warsh. So, at this point in the game, it doesn't really matter how many extra votes he ends up with. He has the 51 votes secured, and that is the exact number he needed to seize control of the printing presses. Yeah, and the macroeconomic numbers are coming in incredibly hot and on the dangerously warm side for the month of April. Our official producer price index for the month of April just dropped, and the headline inflation number is almost triple the standard consensus expectations, up a whopping 1.4% in a single 30-day window. Wow, you literally have to cast your mind all the way back to March of 22 to find a bigger monthly wholesale inflation spike, and that specific historic number was 1.C%. Now, if we strip out the all-important volatile food and energy sectors to look at the core data, we are also staring directly at a total triple header here, folks. The smartest Wall Street analysts were expecting a tiny increase of up 0.3%, but we ended up with a massive jump of up 1 full percent. Up 1% would be the absolute warmest monthly reading since, wow, also March of 22. So first off, the exact policy direction that Kevin Warsh, now officially the Supreme Fed Chair, says that he wants to take national interest rates doesn't match the standard traditional inflation playbook by a long shot, and I think that much is pretty damn obvious to anyone who actually activates their neural pathways. I also don't think this bizarre appointment is an accident by any stretch of the imagination. Man, I do not think interest rates are the real core reason why he is here in Washington right now. And I want to explain the deeper plot to you today because I think it matters a whole lot more than the superficial interest rate debate itself. Meanwhile, everyday consumer inflation data is completely off the charts and ripping through the roof. So, we got the official CPI data earlier this week. And then the wholesale PPI numbers came screaming out this morning, and both of them are literally spiraling out of control. But the truly horrifying aspect of these metrics is that these numbers only capture the first tiny fraction of the raging Iran conflict. A full third of the entire world's emergency oil reserves have already been frantically released from strategic national stockpiles just to artificially keep gas prices down. Massive oil tankers are completely frozen and aren't moving through the critical Strait of Hormuz right now. So the massive global supply chain shock that is driving all of this economic chaos isn't stabilizing at all. It is deepening every single minute of every single hour of every single day. So, we have officially passed the point of no return in this disastrous inflation cycle. So, let us have a real, unvarnished conversation about how all of this madness is interconnected. And more importantly, what comes next for your bank account. So, about like 9 months ago, I put out a detailed list of macro predictions to explicitly put my money where my mouth is, because I find that too often financial commentators just yap a bunch of scary stuff, and then they never follow up on their accuracy. So, I am going to review a major slew of them right now with you, not as some arrogant flex to brag, but to show you something really important about our modern political reality, that autocratic economic rule is fairly predictable, if you know how to read the blueprints. You ready for this? Man prediction number 1. A major war will break out somewhere on the planet that forcefully requires our massive military and financial attention. Prediction number 2. Raging inflation and structural job losses will enter a vicious, self-fulfilling cycle, first putting massive pressure on the long yield end of the bond curve and then rapidly bleeding into the short end, causing the national deficit to balloon way beyond any official government projections. Prediction number 3. The Federal Reserve will be forced to quietly prop up the overnight bank settlement markets with startling frequency, which will ripple aggressively through the global economy as official sovereign nations and unofficial wealth sources desperately seek safe havens elsewhere. Prediction number 4. The federal government will have absolutely no other choice but to forcefully intervene once again in the liquid financial markets that begin to completely collapse under the terrifying weight of margin calls and over-leveraged hedge funds. Prediction number woo. Those elite individuals sitting at the absolute top end of the economic ladder will heavily insulate themselves by funneling massive mountains of cash directly into the mattress, shifting capital into highly speculative alternative assets, and loading up on massive short positions, taking as many giant financial gains on the way down as they have on the way up during the bubble. And prediction number 2, their tyrannical grip over central banking activities and the entire domestic political process will tighten into an absolute chokehold. Okay, so the first 3 predictions are already fully upon us right now, today, in the flesh. The next 3 steps are definitely not wild speculation on my part. They are simply the next logical, mathematical steps in the sequence. And by the very end of this conversation, I think you are going to see exactly why your local bank account is sitting in the line of fire. If you caught our recent deep dive piece on the 10 most important economic terms for our modern times, sitting high on that list was a terrifying concept called fiscal dominance. So as a quick necessary refresher for the group, because this is the exact lens that we are going to discuss everything through today, fiscal dominance occurs when a national government's accumulated debt and annual deficit become so monstrously big that they completely neutralize the normal traditional tools of central bank monetary policy. So, in a normal, healthy, so-called balanced economic environment, the Federal Reserve will systematically raise interest rates to cool down an overheating economy, because higher rates naturally make borrowing money way more expensive for businesses and consumers. People choose to save their cash instead of spending it on junk, and then consumer demand slows down and prices stabilize. You know the drill, man. It is basic economics. And if they cut interest rates, theoretically the exact reverse happens. The economy gets juiced, businesses hire, and asset prices skyrocket, blah blah blah. That is basic Econ 101 textbook stuff. But under the dark reality of fiscal dominance, that entire economic mechanism breaks down completely because the other massive market forces influencing real interest rates, the sheer unimaginable size of the total U.S. debt, the catastrophic trajectory of the federal deficit, and the massive risk premium that global investors charge just to hold our sovereign bonds are significantly bigger and more powerful than whatever the Fed chooses to do with its tiny overnight federal funds rate. See, the Fed only controls that one small sliver of the short-term rate environment, but the global market controls everything else. And right now, in May of 2026, the global market has, made its final definitive decision. The United States of America, under its current chaotic management, is officially a major credit risk to the rest of the world. So the whole mainstream narrative that Kevin Warsh is just going to calmly waltz into the Fed building, wave a magic wand, and single-handedly bring interest rates crashing down to save your mortgage is completely preposterous, man. And it is totally preposterous for 2 distinct reasons. Okay, first off, he doesn't even have the votes inside the building. The FOMC possesses a rigid 12-member voting bloc of seasoned economic governors. So Warsh would have to somehow force 11 other highly independent banking PhDs to completely agree with his wild ideas, or at the very least, scramble to secure a consensus majority. Second, even if he could magically snap his fingers like Thanos and force rates down, it wouldn't even matter to your daily life because your personal auto loans and your home mortgage rates, the actual things that matter to everyday working families, are absolutely not tethered to the short-term federal funds rate. They move in perfect lockstep with the long-term 10-year Treasury bond yield. And that 10-year yield is absolutely not going anywhere useful anytime soon because the international market is heavily pricing in a massive permanent risk premium on American debt. The risk premium is basically the market saying whoever put this new guy in charge is actively trying to torch the entire global economy with tariffs and unbacked spending. So we demand a massive interest rate just to lend them money. So market interest rates go higher regardless of what Kevin Warsh does at his press conferences. Oh shit. And then there is my favorite buddy Scott Bessent over at the Treasury. And if I didn't personally feel the severe financial pain in my own wallet, and we didn't all feel the brutal inflation pain collectively, I would definitely be gloating right now because Bessent is the most smug, self-satisfied, arrogant operator to occupy a position of economic power in modern memory, and he is positively sweating bullets right now behind the scenes. His entire job description is to keep us national debt incredibly cheap and highly desirable to ensure that foreign governments and massive sovereign wealth funds keep buying our treasury bonds every single week. So he has to make American debt look incredibly attractive to outsiders. And meanwhile, his own boss is doing the exact mechanical opposite every single day. He is actively torching the baseline credibility of the United States on the global stage, dollar by dollar, tariff by tariff, Truth Social post by Truth Social post. Man. And let me give you a very real concrete example of this desperation. You might have heard in the financial news recently that the U.S. Treasury quietly started offering massive swap lines to certain wealthy foreign nations, like the UAE. Well, the UAE does not need our money. Okay? Like, they literally possess so much sovereign oil money, it is completely ridiculous. The real hidden reason why we are desperately offering those advanced swap lines is because we are begging them to convert their massive holdings into US dollars. We are intentionally trying to stimulate artificial global demand for the greenback. So, this is just Besant desperately trying to keep the global demand for the dollar from cratering into the floor because the dollar is rapidly losing its structural appeal and the Treasury is losing operational control of the sovereign debt market. When the entire world's most historically reliable borrower starts behaving like a completely reckless, unreliable deadbeat, the rest of the world takes immediate notice, and then they rapidly find alternative safe havens like gold and hard assets. But please hold all of that thought right there because it connects directly to the terrifying endgame we are going to talk about at the very end of this video. Alright, we just got two massive economic data releases over the last 2 days, and they both completely suck. Man, the first is the CPI Consumer Price Index. Consumer prices officially rose 3.8% year-over-year for the month of April. That is the hottest inflationary reading since May of 2023. Now, just remember, in March, it was sitting at 3.3%, and in February, it was down at 3% flat. So, this is not a random anomaly, this is a clear trend. This is a rapidly accelerating upward trend. Energy costs were up a staggering 18% annually. Gasoline was specifically up 28% from a year ago, and nearly 28% over just the last 2 months alone. Heating fuel rose a mind, blowing 54% year-over-year. Everyday groceries jumped 0.7% in a single 30-day window, which was the single biggest monthly food jump in 4 long years. And just as critical to the horrific inflation narrative is the fact that real American wages fell 0.3% year-over-year. That is the first official annual decline in real purchasing power in 3 years. So here's the raw mathematical comparison to really think about. This current economic disaster fully rivals the absolute worst months of what the media and Trump aggressively called Biden's inflation problem. Back in the day, the surface headline data points look very similar, but the underlying causes are different in a very important structural way that you need to grasp. See, under the post-COVID inflation spike of 21 and 22, there were 2 distinct things happening simultaneously. There were genuine global supply chain snarls caused by a literal once-in-a-century global pandemic shutdown, right? And massive corporations were also ruthlessly exploiting the hell out of everyday consumers because they could get away with it. Brilliant researchers across the board have documented that corporate profits accounted for anywhere between 40 and 50% of total consumer price increases from 2020-22. So mega corporations basically just saw regular everyday consumers who were completely flush with federal stimulus cash and said, hey, we will just take all of that back via price hikes. I mean, Fortune 500 CEOs were literally bragging about it openly on their corporate earnings calls and calling it. If you remember when we covered it on this channel at the time, taking price, it was absolutely disgusting, predatory behavior. Now fast forward to this time around, the current supply chain shock isn't being caused by a biological virus. I mean, maybe it actually is a virus, and his name is simply Donald Trump, because he is systematically shutting down pieces of the global economy on his own accord. He is the one who single-handedly snarled the global supply chains this time. The massive Iran war, the sudden Strait of Hormuz closure, the chaotic tariff uncertainty, all of it traces directly back to the exact same reckless, aggressive foreign and economic policy decisions coming from one single guy. Different geopolitical crisis, but the exact same economic outcome, a completely broken supply chain, feeding higher prices for you at the grocery store. The massive difference today, though, is that corporate greed is still heavily happening, but we just don't see it manifesting in the exact same outward way. It is taking a highly different, insidious form because this time around, the average consumer doesn't have any stimulus money left. The American consumer is completely tapped out, credit cards are maxed, and corporations know this reality very well. So instead of price gouging the customer directly at the cash register and destroying demand, they are taking the massive liquidity from prior earnings, from the massive corporate tax cuts, the advantageous bonus depreciation schedules, and the lighter regulatory burdens, and they are using that cash mountain to buy back their own stock. The Russell 3000 stock buyback authorizations are already up a massive 36%. So U.S. companies are currently on track to repurchase close to $1 trillion in their own shares this year,